I think I was even in that stage. I was thinking, especially that it was French, and French is not my best language for writing. So we were lucky to have Johnny to then look at the text and make it more French than my Romanian translated into English, translated into French would. But yes, it was always we knew we wanted the voice, and we also knew we wanted it to be a kind of journey. We are experimenting with this episodic structure. We have a feature film right now that is based, it's much more personal story, so in a sense we are the protagonists and we are the voices behind it. And it is based on encounters with different people from different places in Europe and the US. So we're thinking a lot about this more episodic, or this road movie formula, if you will. And that's what we try to do with this one.
Hello. I wanted to ask you if you wanted to make it for TV more. It seems like a more informational type of documentary.
So we were interested in information. So as opposed to other projects like the observational one that you just mentioned, I think we were interested in people describing their process, and it's the way it turned out. And I guess looking at it now, I mean, I hope people in TV stations would be interested in it, and it ended up being this 25-minute duration. Also, that might recommend it if people would be interested. But we were interested in documenting a process that might not be the same maybe in 20 years from now and 30 years from now. We had a more maybe traditional ethnographic interest in making this film. We wanted to be able to hear and to have these people documented in a way, thinking through their process as well as doing it. So yeah, it was important to both see and hear the process described.
I suppose you also know a bit, or maybe you don't, like the antique shops in Romania or the crafts in Romania. What would you say is the difference? And if you were to make a film about that, would it have the same playfulness as this one?
Oh, it's a good question. I have no idea. I think the playfulness is also something that came from the objects themselves. So there was I think antique shops in general have a really strong local specific or regional specific. So in this one, it was very interesting to see Canada's history from the First Nations, from the indigenous population, to the French colonial past, to the English colonial past, to the proximity of the American culture. So all of these things were represented in there, and they were just illustrated there because those are the kinds of objects that got there. Those are the kinds of objects that people collecting antiques would find, and then they put them in there. In a sense, antique shops are somehow, I guess, modern-day ethnographic museums. They speak about local culture. I would say we'd have to respect that, and we'd have to see where a Romanian antique store would take us. That would be super interesting. But for example, I've always been interested in flea markets. I think the antique shops, especially in Quebec, are kind of equivalent of the flea market as we know it. Because
why do you think the difference is in the relationships between people and the objects in antique shops and people and the objects at flea market? Why do they have a different meaning?
So I don't know that there are too many flea markets in North America. I think it has to do with our regional culture here. I think it's Central and Eastern Europe and maybe the Eurasian space even further as we go into Central Asia or the Caucasus. We have, and the Middle East, we have the flea markets. Maybe it's a difference of class. Maybe it's a difference of audience. Antique shops are obviously catering primarily to a tourist audience. But then nowadays, so do flea markets. So if you go to the flea market in Cluj every Sunday, for example, or in Sofia in Bulgaria, to give two random examples that I've encountered, you'll see hipsters, you'll see tourists, and you'll also see just people from the neighboring villages coming there because they need a new teapot or something. But I think that is also the case in these antique shops, except that they're downtown. So obviously, you get some more of the touristy audience, but then that doesn't exclude necessarily the locals. For example, the lady who bought the beetle, the bubblegum, she was from Quebec. She was not a tourist.
I was thinking of that scene in the film where you have this really fast editing, like when we're in her leather shop. Was there an inspiration for that one, or did you somehow remember certain films that would do it, or was it just from the entire group of films you've seen edited like that you decided to do it as well?
Yeah, thank you. It's another great question. We wanted to replicate her process. She's so dynamic. She's someone who does 5 things at the same time. So we wanted to somehow embed that we wanted to embed some of the pacing or some of the mood in the editing of each of these scenes. So while Guillaume, the luthier, is someone who works mostly, and they all work, most of them work on their own, but he's very, it's a very contemplative and it's a very minute process, and he takes his time, and there's no urgency. Huguette was always running. She was always, I need to do this, but then I also need to cut this leather, and I need to go to the boutique to take someone's measurements because they want to pick up a coat, but it needs to be modified a little bit. So we wanted to kind of mirror her restlessness in the workshop, and then also I guess the chaos and the multitude of things, or the multitude of steps that this process takes, because it's not only her working on codes quietly. She does probably the work of 10 people at the same time. She could review some employees or some help there.